So that's kind of where 9 Strong came from. Is, for so long, I was so worried about what I was missing. And my mindset flip was, you got to be grateful for what you still have, man. So, that's where the 9 came from. I'm so happy with the 9 that I still have. I'm not even worried about the one that I lost, because if I'm focused on that one, then I'm not here anymore. I'll be 100% honest.
Welcome to the Talking Shop podcast, where I'm here to share stories, lessons, and experiences in sports performance and professional development. I'm your host, Matt Tometz, and today I'm joined by Coach Bryan Cromer. How are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent, man. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. Thank you for taking some time out of your crazy lifestyle. Coach Cromer is a dad of 2 kids under 5, a husband to an amazing wife that I was not paid to say. He's the head varsity softball coach at Panther High School. And he also does work with Jeremy Boone, Leader Kit, all around the leadership development space. And that is actually how he and I know each other. So Steve, my mentor, and Bryan, they're both kind of like Jeremy's right-hand guys. And then I got in with all that stuff. And even just a few phone calls that we've had, you've already made an impact on me and just the value that I've received from just your insights and stuff like that. And just what I get from Steve, I can only imagine what the people in your life get from you as well. So I'm super jealous of them. But so that is a little bit about his background, how we know each other. So I have the questions that I sent you, but I have a formal name for the questions that I want to ask that I don't send you, that are personalized to you, because I ask every guest the same thing. And it's called the surprise round. So Coach Cromer's social handles are Living 9 Strong. And he's got a pretty cool banner picture on Twitter because he only has 9 fingers. So I don't know the story, but if you feel comfortable sharing, I'm super interested on hearing kind of just how that story came to be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually one of the stories that I planned on sharing with you based on the questions that you sent me.
We can save it. Which question?
It's okay. It's okay.
All right, we'll do it.
Yeah, we can do it. We'll just jump right into it. Yeah, so it kind of all started back in the day when I was teaching special education. I was in a self-contained class with basically moderate to severe disabilities. That's what my original, teaching degree was in. And it started off a normal day. I got a phone call from the front office saying one of our students was having a little bit of a difficulty transitioning to the classroom, so they needed my help. I got down there and amidst, some flailing hands, we escorted the gentleman up to the room. Nothing out of the ordinary. Got up there, happened to have a scratch on my hand, my left index finger to be exact. And, went through the normal protocol, washed my hands, put soap and water and bandaged it up. Didn't think anything about it until the next day. And it just felt different. That's the best way that I can say it. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel like any other scratches. And progressively throughout the day, it just kept getting a little bit worse and a little bit worse, and it hurt a little bit more. And to fast forward a little bit, I went to Duke Urgent Care, and they basically said, it is infected. We're going to send you home with some painkillers and some antibiotics for the weekend. If you don't feel okay on Monday, come back in. We went about 2 blocks. My wife drove me, thank goodness. She drove me 2 blocks. By the time we got to the Walgreens to get the prescriptions filled, I spiked a fever. It was about 87 degrees outside, and I was shivering so bad that I went out to the car, sat in the car, and turned the heat on. I just couldn't stop shivering. So we get home and they take my temperature, and had a temperature. So our roommate at the time just happened to be a nurse at Duke. So she took me to the emergency room, answered all the questions when we, went in there. And the last thing that I really vividly remember was they took my temperature, and when I was admitted, it was 103.5. 4. So it was pretty high. Fast forward another couple of days, we found out that I had a strep A bacterial infection. And once those get underneath, the skin and the bloodstream, it's pretty much lethal. It can become deadly. People lose limbs. There were stories coming out that people were losing, both legs, both arms, or a combination of, any of those. And I walked away with, losing one finger, and not even the whole finger. So some joke that I should be 9 1/4 strong. But that's kind of the long story short. I'll save where the 9 strong came from for later.
9 1/4 strong definitely doesn't have the same ring to it. So
not at all.
I'm definitely on your side. And Coach Cromer is out in North Carolina, and I forgot, but he's recently retired. So congratulations from teaching.
Yes.
Full-time softball. And then the second question of my surprise round is, how did you get into softball? And what's one thing that working in softball has taught you that like you can only learn from working with softballers that everyone can learn from?
Oh man. So I kind of stumbled into softball by accident, you could say. My softball background, my cousins played softball, my sister played softball, my dad coached softball. So I've been around the sport forever. But I never had a desire to coach. So I grew up playing baseball, and that was my love. That was my passion. It was my first coaching experience down in South Carolina. And when I moved up to North Carolina to join my wife, who was my fiance at the time, there was no baseball position open at Panther Creek. Dan Hall, who is now our athletic director, joined Panther Creek 1 year prior to me, and he basically had a full staff when I joined. So, our principal looked at me during the interview and said, we do have a softball coaching position available if you're interested. And I was like, softball, baseball, they're not the same thing, but, I've always wanted to be a varsity coach. I was 28 years old at the time, and I was like, this is the opportunity I've been waiting for. Not the sport that I desired necessarily, but I'm going to go for it, and I will never look back. I will be 100% honest. I will never go back to coaching baseball. I love the sport. I love coaching softball so much more. The sport it's really taught me that, connection is key. There's nothing that connecting with the athletes can really top. I could win a state championship and I would still probably share the stories that, of us warming up and like stupid games that we played just on a whim. Funny jokes that somebody told. I'll remember that stuff more than any of the wins that, we've gotten along the way.
Impact is impact, and it's not necessarily a role or a sport or a location, as Steve has reiterated multiple times on my podcast, and something that I'm starting to come to terms with is that, connection's connection, and all you need is that first kind of real taste of it, and you're hooked. So very cool how a lot of these stories kind of come to be on how it's like wrong place, right time, I guess, if that's how we want to describe it. But yeah, super cool. So Panther Creek does pretty well, as Steve shared with me. So we're speaking with a softball legend.
I hope so. One of these days.
As those are Steve's words. So fingers crossed, once all this COVID stuff is done, you guys are back to kicking butt full time. So those are my 2 surprise questions. You survived, and we will get into it. So what is the first most fundamental story? And I described this last podcast as like the first biggest fork that you came to kind of in your journey, that if you went left instead of going right, it would have all been different.
Yeah. So it goes back to the 9 strong. I kind of shared what happened, and I didn't get into where the 9 strong came from and the outcome that, came from it. So, once I got that diagnosis of what what bacterial infection it was and what the treatments were. We really did understand. And I say we, my wife and I, she took care of me through the whole process. We were very fortunate that, she didn't have a full-time job at the time. She was fresh out of law school. But yeah, it was a journey that we took together. And, it was just something that kind of came out of nowhere. And I'm probably going to get kind of emotional because that was a really hard time in my life. But, the diagnosis showed me that, random things can happen. And it's all about how you react to them. And so once I got the diagnosis and once I found out that I was going to lose my finger, officially, I had to wait 3 weeks for that. I went home for 3 weeks and had a basically dead finger attached to my hand. I have pictures. I'll show you, not on here though. Those aren't for anybody's eyes. But when I found out that I was going to lose the finger, and when I actually had it amputated that next day and looked down and saw what I considered a deformity, I kind of went south, like real quick. I'd always, and I hate to admit it, but when I would come up, to a stop sign or a stoplight and I would see, somebody that had a deformity, or I'd pass somebody that had a deformity, I always thought, what's wrong? What happened? Like what's wrong with him? And so when it happened to me, that was my first, kind of comparison is, well, now something's wrong with me. Now I'm not normal because I don't have 10 fingers. And so that thought process, that mentality just, it played over and over and over in my head. And I couldn't really get past it. And, it was like a rabbit hole. I just kept digging myself a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper the more I thought about it. And I finally got to a point where, if I went one more day thinking that way, I literally contemplated suicide on a more serious level than I ever had before. And, it took such a mental and emotional toll on me, that I was like, there's just no coming back from this. And, my father-in-law, I love my wife and I really appreciate everything that she did. And she tried her hardest, but even she couldn't, really get me out of that. But my father-in-law just randomly looked at me one day and said, we don't give a crap about your finger. Those weren't his exact words. You can imagine what he really said. We're just glad that you're here. And if you knew the relationship with my father-in-law before that, you could probably assume it with typical father-in-law and son-in-law relationships. In the beginning, it was kind of stressful, and we weren't the closest. But when he said that, it was just like, wow. So that kind of that was like the first thing that kind of turned me in my mindset thinking, in a different way. And I started rehab with and PT with my hand. And the first thing when we went in there, she was like, I need you to touch your fingers, all of your fingers together. I was like, well, I don't have that one, so I can't touch it. And I was already cracking jokes on myself. But she was like, no, like you need to be able to touch your thumb to your pinky. And I couldn't do that with my left hand because it just been sitting idle for about a month and a half. And the atrophy, it was night and day. So right then and there, I kind of got the mindset that, I'm going to take it one step at a time. And, I'm going to do whatever I can, whenever I can right now to make sure that whatever that next step is, I'm going to get there. And so that's kind of where 9 Strong came from, is, for so long, I was so worried about what I was missing. And my mindset flip was, you got to be grateful for what you still have, man. So, that's where the 9 came from. I'm so happy with the 9 that I still have. I'm not even worried about the one that I lost. because if I'm focused on that one, then I'm not here anymore. I'll be 100% honest. And the 9 strong piece came from basically I was like 9 fingers strong, and that doesn't have a ring to it, right? So I cut the fingers out literally, right, and cut it down to 9 strong, and that's something that's stuck. I've got a wristband with it on. I've got a license plate. So it's not just a story anymore. It's more of a mantra. It's more of a it's the tale of who I am, and who I am now.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for sharing that and the depth of that story. And it's funny, when I first had Steve on my podcast, I asked, who I should tag that's like in their corner and stuff. And he said, "Oh, Bryan Cromer, living 9 strong." I was like, that's a weird handle. I wonder what that's about. And then you have the it's in your Twitter bio. It says living better with 9 than I ever did with 10, if I'm not mistaken. And it's crazy how like one sentence can, like, we don't give a crap about your fingers, like just how many words that is, but how it's changed kind of everything. And I'll try to tie this into a leader kit thing. The 3 lies of identity is you're not what you have, you're not what you do, and you're not who others say you are. I guess in this case, you're not how many fingers you have, if that's appropriate to say. But like, it's so I guess I've never talked about this on my podcast, but I have a genetic condition where I would get cartilage just growth on my hands that they have to shave it down. So my right index finger, if you can see it, it's like the same size as my pinky, because that growth plate was like closed. And then on this hand, I can't get my fingers together because like that growth plate was closed on the inside. So it kind of goes sideways. And like, not that it's exactly the same, but like I have like, I guess you could say, deformed hands. And we've had talks about fixing my fingers and stuff. But like, I don't know, chicks dig scars, and I always liked having surgery and stuff. But it's crazy, like, even just we can get wrapped up in those things like fingers and whatnot. And there's been days when it's bothered me, and the genetic mutation started with me. It was like a frame shift for those biology nerds out there. But so follow-up questions based on your story. How many days or weeks was it from that one day in school to the operation?
So the injury happened in October. It was middle of October. And the amputation happened, the injury happened the beginning of October, and the amputation happened towards the beginning of November. So it was about a month, because I was in Duke for a week. I lost, I think it was like 27 pounds or something like that. I didn't eat an actual meal. And my wife has a picture of this. My first bite of pizza was about 4 or 5 days after being admitted. And she was like, "Oh, thank goodness he's finally eating." Before that, it was all liquid diets, Jell-O, applesauce, whatever they could get me to keep down. But it was a week in the hospital and then 3 weeks at home. And ironically, my follow-up visit was on Halloween. So I walked back into the doctor's office, and the doctor looked at my finger, and he was like, "Man, that's a hot mess," basically. And I was like, yeah, I would have been fine if you cut off like 3 weeks ago. So we got the surgery, set up and scheduled for a rough date. And the nurse came back in, and she was talking about it. And before I left, she said, "Happy Halloween." And I said, "Well, I guess I got part of my Halloween costume already ready. So I'll just have to figure out the rest of it." So that was one thing that kind of helped me, get through it, was, cracking jokes on myself to, lighten the mood with myself before anybody else.
It's funny you mentioned that. My last surgery was October 17 of my senior year of high school, and I asked to keep the gown, and the nurse was like, "Shh, you can do it, but like, don't tell anyone." So I was a surgery, because I still had my bandages on. She was like, and then I was a surgery patient for Halloween.
Nice.
So 2 questions. First, what is the best joke or best prank you ever got on someone with your finger? And second is, when was the first day that like you hopped in bed and you were like, I didn't think about it once today? Like, how long did it take to have like a, I guess, normal day, if that makes sense?
Um, well, I'll answer the second question first. I still don't know that I consciously am aware of, not what a normal day is. Um, I mean, because I'm constantly reminding myself about it, and I think that's what keeps me on track to what I want to do. Right, with that sentence, like being stronger mentally, physically, and emotionally than I ever was with 10 fingers. Um, so that's a constant daily thing. But as far as like looking down and saying, "Oh yeah, it is not there anymore." It was, gosh, probably years, if I had to be honest. I was, right after that the surgery happened. I mean, I would go in restaurants and like, put it in a hoodie pocket or put it under my arm just to hide it so that people didn't look at it and ask about it. I was that self-conscious about it. But the best prank, honestly, it came with my son. So everybody knows the magic finger trick, this one.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right. So I did that, right? And I don't know how old he was, maybe 2, 3, somewhere in there. So I'm going like this. I'm like, all right, you ready? And I pretended to throw it at him. I was like, you missed it. Where is it? He's like, where'd it go? And he walked around the room looking for it. I was dying. I have a video of it on my phone. I was dying laughing. I still don't think he really realized what was going on. But yeah, that was by far the best, that I think the best laugh that I got from a prank.
That's epic. You'll definitely have to never let him live that down.
Oh
That's
no, that's going
awesome.
to be in his wedding video, someday, or his college graduation or high school graduation or something.
For sure, for sure. So next, moving on to the next big question. What is the coolest story you have thus far in your journey?
So the coolest, we're just jumping ship from 9 strong and going, right into softball. Back in 2019, Panther Creek softball won its first regular season conference championship, first in school history. And during that time, we played 10 conference games. And one of those games, we were going back and forth with what I would consider our rival. I'm not going to name any school names to be, to be politically correct and nice, but we were down by 6 runs. Or I'm sorry, 5 runs in the bottom of the 7th inning with 2 outs and 2 strikes on the batter, and we had a runner on second base, which was a leadoff double. So 1 runner on base, down to your final strike. And I don't know how, but we ended up clawing our way back into it and coming back to win that game. And I don't even think the players knew this, but that game actually clinched the conference championship for us, because we had beaten the number 2 and 3 teams. We had swept them at that point. So, I still get text messages from coaches that were at that game, that were watching the game just randomly, about that game. And we still have, players that were either a part of the JV team, or we're even coming up through, some of the middle school teams that were there to watch the game. They still talk about it. And, the coolest thing is, like, for me, it showed everybody. That's one of the kind of the stepping stones or the milestones for us, is like, the game's not over until the final out. So you can get us down to 2 strikes, up 5 runs, up 6 runs. It doesn't matter. Like, we're going to fight our way until that final out is called. And we're going to fight for every single pitch that we get.
Was that at home? So it was a walk-off?
It was at home. Yeah, it was one of the craziest games, most memorable games that I have ever been a part of. To the point where I was a part of the state championship baseball team, my junior year in high school. And that game for us, that comeback game in the bottom of the 7th inning, that felt to me more special than the state championship game, that I was a part of in high school. It felt, that's how big that stage felt, in that moment.
If you remember, could you narrate like the last like 2 or 3 plays?
Oh man. So we had, so let me go back. So we had 1, 2. All right. So we had, I'll even do, yeah, it'd be the final 3 batters probably. So we had a runner on second, and we bunted because they were struggling to field bunts and throw people out. So
With 2
we
outs?
bunted with 2 outs.
Oh
I
my.
bunted the ball, overthrow, right? And then, so we ended up with a runner on second base and a senior up at bat. So runner at second base is now the tying run. I'm sorry, tying run came around. Winning run is at second base. So a senior who had not gotten a hit all day, has struggled. I think she struck out twice, honestly. She comes up, and in my mind, I'm like, all right, if she can just put the ball in play, I know it's going to find a hole. So she gets, I think it's a 2-1 count or a 1-2 count somewhere. I know the numbers were 1 and a 2. So either way, it works out. But that ball was thrown, and she hit a little dribbler back up the middle that found its way through. And I mean, I've got a video of me like jumping up and down, waving the runner around third. And as soon as she rounds third base, I'm just like, I'm going crazy because I'm like, we're just gonna win the game. We're gonna win the game. And she comes around and she slides in to home plate. Umpire calls safe. And like, it was deafening to me how loud it was at that field. I was getting text messages and phone calls for days after that game, like, man, congratulations. Although I'm never coming to see y'all play again because, y'all were running through the conference opponents. And then when I show up, y'all are down 5 runs in the bottom of the 7th inning. So we're not coming back to any games, but good luck in the playoffs. But it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. I'm going to have to practice on my announcing skills.
It'll be something to do with all this free time you have now that you're half retired.
Yeah.
So last question on that story. So of course, starting the inning down 5 or 6, probably wasn't the most hopeful, but when was that moment that you were like, it's going to happen? Like, when did you know that like it was just going to get through, or you knew that they weren't going to field the bunt and it was going to all play out?
So the funny thing is, when we got the leadoff double, I was like, okay, that's great. That's awesome. I'm like thinking in my head what I'm going to say after this game, because I didn't want to think that we were going to lose, but I was just getting mentally prepared myself for if it happened. And we scored. So we were down by 5. We scored 3 runs. And when we had 2 outs with 2 runners on base, and, we were down by 2. And I think the runners were actually at second and third. I was like, we've got it. I literally have no doubt. And I think that's honestly when, our senior was walking up to the plate who hadn't gotten a hit yet, that game. She was 0 for 2 or 0 for 3. She was walking up the bat, and I was literally looking at the runner on second base and telling her, when this ball gets through, you're scoring. Like, there is no question about it. You will be the winning run for us. You are going, so just get ready, because I am waving you home. I will take another out. We'll play extra innings. That's fine, but you're going home. So yeah, it was within the last 2 or 3 batters. Once we got those 2 runners on with that senior coming up, I was like, it's in the bag. We got it.
Epic story. Definitely. So last big story. What is the story you're most proud of thus far? So looking back, like the biggest kind of full circle moment thus far.
Yeah. So this has been one that has really been in the mix and has kind of evolved over, probably 5 or 6 years. I've been at Panther Creek with my assistant varsity coach for 9 years after this last season. And she's been there for every game with me, or almost every game. She's missed a couple of games, but she's been there every season. And we had the idea, it's probably about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, to create a space during practice time where it was off field and the girls got together basically and had a safe space to kind of pour into each other, to connect on a deeper level. And we called it Empower Hour. And basically, it started off as, myself and my assistant coach, Jill, Coach Smedley, we would talk about what we wanted or what we thought was best for the girls to talk about. And I wasn't in there. I felt like, a male being in a space where females are trying to connect is not going to facilitate the kind of connection that you really want. So I removed myself, and that was the hardest thing I've ever had to do as a coach, is turn the power over to somebody else, and putting full 100% trust in them that they got it. And, it paid off tenfold, a millionfold. I can't even put a number on it. But it has evolved into, it's evolved from a place where the coaches kind of, I would say, controlled the topics, to, a place where the players are taking more ownership in it now and actually requesting, time to meet. And, if the players request it, the coaches give it. That's how we've operated the last 2 seasons, or 3 seasons, really. If the players step up and say, "Hey, coach, we need some time," we feel like that connection pays off on the field more than extra reps and extra practice. So we're doing everything that we can to make sure that they're connecting, together off the field, as best as possible. They don't have to love each other all the time, but they don't have to be best friends. But once we get back on the field, we all understand that we got a job to do. We got a role, in the program, and that time, in that space has really paid off for them, and for the program.
So 2 questions kind of on that. What was the spurring or inspiration of that? Was it a feeling of disconnect between the girls? Was it just hearing like something at like a softball coaches conference, or kind of what was the genesis of that? And then second, what was the first moment that you saw that pay off, or you realized like this happened because of that?
Well, my assistant coach, Jill, I mean, she was in most of the meetings, in the beginning, and she would kind of give me an overview, like a very vague overview, on how it went. Not going into any kind of detail about anything specifically, but she saw it way earlier than I did. And, I think she saw it because she knew what happened in there specifically. And she saw, dynamics and relationships kind of change and evolve for the better. And because that happened on a personal level, that, that carried over to the field. And that's when I saw it. So there was a lot that went on before that kind of evolved into what I ultimately saw. And I mean, that took, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort and energy, not just from, coaches, but I mean, really from the players. And it takes a lot of trust for them to step out of their shell, and share that kind of stuff. But as far as what, really inspired it, it really kind of just happened on a whim. It happened in a conversation that Jill and I were having, one day, and, the idea popped out. I don't even know who suggested it first. That doesn't even matter. But the more we talked about it, the more we were like, this could really be something special. And, I know that we always do like an end of the year evaluation, with the coaching staff, and it came out in one of those talks that, we felt like we had a little bit too much drama, or we felt like we weren't, everybody wasn't vibing the right way on field. And, what is the cause of that, and trying to dive deeper in that. So instead of being reactive to everything, we wanted to be proactive. And I think that's where, that idea evolved is, we're going to do a lot of work on the front end and get ahead of this, whatever it is, and give the girls the opportunity and the chance to really pour into each other, connect with each other, again, and just kind of build that chemistry and that energy that we want to see on the field. But if we're talking about, the connection transferring to the field, and like, I got to be able to trust you, if I'm playing with you, I got to be able to trust you, on the field, that you got my back. Well, how do I know that you really got my back if we're not talking and having meaningful conversations? So that's kind of where we brainstormed it from, and kind of how it evolved over time.
Fantastic. So it was interesting as I got in with the TCU women's tennis team, just hearing some of the meetings with just the coaches, some of the team meetings, and they actually did a similar type of thing on Mondays, but then also hearing stories from the men's tennis coaches, and just like how, obviously like coaching guys and girls is very different, but this idea of like an empower hour with girls versus with guys. So if you had to give, last question on this topic, some sort of advice for a coach working with a guy's sport, having, done guy sports obviously your whole life and being a dude, where is the value in doing something like that with the guys team, and how would you recommend doing that?
Well, I mean, especially nowadays, I really feel like guys need to be well-rounded, right? And I think a lot of men are somewhat afraid to show emotion, and vulnerability is power. I mean, as much as I hate to put that out there, it's out there already, but vulnerability is power, and there's power in story. And if you take away the opportunity to share stories, and kind of get down into those special details and bring out emotion and stuff like that, if you take away that opportunity, then you're really robbing, your athletes of the chance to really have a meaningful experience. And, I would say, like, how to do it. It's going to differ with every group. It's going to differ with every athlete to athlete, and the coach, because there's a dynamic there too. But, creating a space away from the sport, away from the practice field, away from the game field, where that whatever is said in that room is not going to leave that room, unless of course it's detrimental to your well-being, physically. Then it's not going anywhere. And I think it doesn't happen in a day either. I think everybody wants it like, hey, what can I do? All right, we're going to put it in place. Well, it didn't work. You got to work with it and evolve it. I mean, and each group coming in and each group going out, ask feedback, ask questions, use the athletes. I mean, they know everything about themselves, whether they think they do or not. So if you ask the right questions, then they're going to give you the answers, and you're going to be able to use those answers to put in, whatever you want to put in the way that it makes sense to them, not the way that it makes sense to you. So don't try to force anything on them. Have them contribute, have them help build it. And, it's going to stand forever.
You got to design that environment and lead with questions. Look at me go.
Yeah.
All right. Fantastic. So last question. So on TSP, I love the theoretical, the stories, lessons, experiences, because the X's and O's are why we're coaches. That's what brings us together. But consequently, when it comes time to reflect, catch up with old teammates and athletes and stuff like that, the X's and O's are the last things that get brought up. But at the end of the day, we are all here to become better practitioners and become better at what we do. So if you had to give the listener one question to ask themselves on a daily basis, just a sticky note on the mirror, what would that question be to help them get better?
Yeah, it would be where or to who can I give more intentional attention? And the phrase intentional attention kind of popped into my head about honestly a year ago. During the whole COVID thing. I frequently got stressed out about everything, and I would run to my phone and look at social media or do something that would distract me. And so I started thinking about, where is my attention going, and what are the things that I'm pouring into, and are they really building me up the way that I need to be built up? So if you can do a daily reflection, whether it's at night after the day's finished or in the morning, to prepare for your day and ask yourself, where can I give more intentional attention, or who do I need to give that attention to? I think that's going to open up, your ability to say, okay, I need to steer today this way, and this is why. So there are going to be a lot of pieces that kind of fall into place there, and it kind of gets you grounded and keeps you grounded, in the moment, and not thinking too far ahead or too much about the past. It kind of keeps you in the present a little bit more than some of the other reflective questions or planning questions would do.
Yeah, and intentional is a word I love because it's rooted in action. What are you intentionally doing or intentionally giving attention? But that was one of the main things that kind of hit me as I was going through this leader kit stuff with Steve and Winning Leader Academy, was just like realizing how much intentionality goes into being a good or better leader, as boiled down as to simple word choice. As there's been a few phrases that I've tossed in that like I chose specific verbs and nouns and stuff like that. And just like, there is no like accident. Well, there is like stumbling into softball and living 9 strong, but there's no accident when it comes to like you creating the most value, right? Engineering value. So whatever it is, whether it's intentionally accomplishing a goal, intentionally trying to add more value, intentionally trying to crush the day, I think just this idea of like specifically doing, I'm trying to figure out a better word for intentional, or just like way to rephrase it, but like that's just the word. Like, what are you just doing that you would not have done otherwise, and just like taking a step back and saying, and like, I think it comes from like having power, like that's one thing that I love about WLA is like, I know that I'm specifically doing things right now. Do I wish I was farther along? Obviously, but like, I think that there's so much power in knowing that you can specifically do things. You can intentionally do things that you wouldn't have done otherwise just by asking yourself a simple question. And that was my best way to try to rephrase and kind of summarize that question. But I think it's very simple: intentional attention.
Well, and that word to me, it kind of transfers the power from I can to I will. When you answer that question, it's like, where do or who do I need to give attention to. You identify it, and then right then and there you have a choice to make, and it's, I can go, I'm not going to, or I am. And I always go for, when I ask myself that question, I always find myself going to, okay, I will, consciously make that decision to reach out to so-and-so today, or to complete this task, or to, pour a little bit more into myself, or whatever it is that I identify. By answering that question, because I have identified it, I am so much more likely to actually do it.
I think the hardest part of that process, or the easiest part, is actually doing it. The hardest part is figuring out what the answer to that question is, and then it just becomes do or do not. So the hardest part is like figuring out where or who you need to intentionally give attention to. But after that, it's just execute, just do. So
that's the beauty of the question too, is you're doing a little bit of reflecting, but you're also doing a little bit of planning at the same time. So that's why I say it kind of keeps you grounded, because you're constantly evaluating, you're constantly planning, and then you bring it to the point of execution. Kind of like what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, tying both together. And the last episode, this will be 109. On 107, my Thailand buddy, his question was, what would my future self give advice to my current self about? It's like, you know the answer. You just have to ask your question, give yourself the space to think about it, realize what your options are. And one is to do what you determined or to not. And then it becomes pretty simple at that point.
Yeah.
So yeah, reflection and planning and execution. It's a solid formula right there. So wrapping this up, I want to say thank you very much for, being super open and candid about your stories and sharing about all that stuff. And now the red carpet is yours to plug whatever you got to plug. Where can we get more of Coach Cromer?
Well, right now I am actually on a social media hiatus. I deleted everything off my phone, and I'm going social media free for an entire 3 months, so an entire summer. So right now you will not see me on social media for a couple of months. I'll be back in the middle of August, but definitely, Twitter, Instagram is another good one. I'm usually off Facebook for the most part, but Panther Creek softball, man, that's where to find me. You'll see me a little bit around Jeremy Boone and Winning Leader Academy as well. So I got to give my shout out to that guy, because if it weren't for him, honestly, I would not be where I am today. I can honestly say that, the 9 strong got me going in the direction. Everything that I've accomplished over the last 3 years has had some form or fashion has come back down to one of his frameworks. So I'm extremely grateful for him and everything that he's done, and his presence in my life for sure. But no, I mean, that's about it. That's where I live and give my time. So I'm excited. I really do appreciate you having me on here.
Fantastic. And if anyone is interested in any of the work Jeremy Boone does or WLA, feel free to reach out to Coach Cromer or myself. I will shamelessly plug, advertise, promote anything that Jeremy does, just the impact that he and you and Steve have had on me. Honestly, like being almost 25 with all the exposure to the things I have thus far, it honestly feels like a cheat code. Yeah. And I'll leave it at that, pretty vague. So people have to reach out. But I want to say thank you very much again. And I hope you enjoy your social media, not binge. What's the opposite of binge? Hiatus. Enjoying some well-deserved, well-earned off time with the 2 boys and a relaxing summer. And we will talk soon.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me again.